Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the Special Committee on Assessment Practices to order. Jared, please take roll.
Mr. DeMarco,
He's joining late.
Ms. Filiaggi, Mr. Betkowski, Mr. Palmieri,
Here.
President Katina,
Here.
and I believe we have Mr. Dewar with us as well.
Okay. At this point, we have invited guest Jennifer Liptak. She's here in case there's any questions from anybody. John Silvestri and Mike Soley. The approval of minutes 12755-23.
Motion to approve the minutes of the January 31st, 2023 meeting of the Special Committee on Assessment Practices.
John, would you make
So
that
moved.
motion?
Yeah, so moved.
Second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Member DeMarco has joined, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Motion carries. We'll now go into the agenda items, the discussion of the topic of the veto of bill number 12525-22 and chief assessment officer appointments. Before we begin, I'd like to make an opening statement. Good afternoon, everyone. I've called this meeting to have a discussion about the chief executive's veto of bill number 12525-22, which I introduced last December and which deals with the appointment and duties of the chief assessment officer. As we all know, the Joffrey litigation has been playing out for quite a while now, and the court's determinations in that case led me to create this special committee and introduce 3 bills aimed at ensuring the county could never again be in this position of basically overcharging taxpayers through the application of an incorrect CLR in the appeal process. Bill number 12525-22 is one of those bills. As we've heard more about the Joffrey case last fall and into this year, a glaring issue ran through discussion: a lack of independent, qualified oversight. Our administrative code has for decades contained provisions establishing the qualifications for the chief assessment officer, the duties of the CAO, and the appointment process for the CAO. These are found in the administrative code, but over the years, those legal requirements have increasingly been pushed aside or possibly ignored, and in my view, that's a big part of leading us to where we are here today. Make no mistake, everyone agrees that the CAO is an appointed position. The administrative code has said that for 20 years. The chief executive's veto message says that. Bill number 12525-22 says that. There's no dispute on that point. The CAO is not a department director. The Office of Property Assessments is an office within the Department of Administrative Services, and the CAO is therefore not within the Manager's Department Director Appointment Authority. And the Home Rule Charter is absolutely clear about how non-director appointments are made. It is the power and duty of council to confirm or reject appointments, not some appointments, not with certain exemptions in mind, and not on an occasion that provision says council has the power to confirm or reject appointments without limitation. Because it is undisputed the CAO is an appointed position, council confirmation authority is clearly established in the charter. One of the goals of 12525-22 was therefore to render the CAO appointment process consistent with the process established in the charter. But over and above this, we repeatedly heard about the lack of a qualified independent CAO. For a time, there was no CAO in place. In time, the chief assessment officer was a computer programmer who came nowhere near meeting the qualifications established in the administrative code. Because that one person that the chief executive unilaterally decided to put in that position. But for my money, the most disturbing thing we heard is the CAO was being treated as an at-will employee of the chief executive. His veto message even asserts at length that this is the way the CAO should be treated. Within that sort of environment, the CAO will inevitably be beholden to the chief executive. He or she will need to always worry about being fired if they don't do his or her bidding. Whether it's right or wrong or illegal, that must end. And restoring the process for appointing the CAO allows for public review of nominations, qualifications, and provides the necessary degree of independence from the whims of whoever the chief executive happens to be. In this case, having an unqualified CAO who was beholden solely to the chief executive resulted in the county cooking the books. As Judge Hertzberg put it, thousands of taxpayers were bilked out of their hard-earned money. even as costs of groceries, gasoline, and pretty much everything else have soared. On some level, it doesn't matter where this was intentional or not. The options before us with the CLR calculation process was either incompetently administered or was intentionally manipulated. And honestly, I don't know which is worse. But the impact to our taxpayers is the same either way. As former Supreme Court Justice Marshall noted all the way back in 1819, when deciding McCullough versus Maryland, an unlimited power to tax involves necessarily a power to destroy, because there is a limit beyond which no institution and no property can bear taxation. I introduced this bill to take the power to destroy our taxpayers out of the hands of any one person and restore the appointment process established by the charter. For these reasons, unless we hear some revelations today, my intention is to introduce a motion to override the chief executive's veto of bill number 12525-22 on Tuesday. Having said these opening remarks, Mr. Soley, would you like to come up and offer any testimony on the bill as it's outlined?
Sure. Start with the fact that the job description for the chief assessor is in the administrative code. We have well over 6,000 employees here in Allegheny County. Certainly there was a reason back in 2000 when the new county council and Mr. Roddy decided that this was an important function of government. The job description is in there. It just didn't happen the last for almost 9 years. There was somebody that was unqualified, and the woman that was asked to run the assessment office as chief assessor didn't apply for the job. She was just appointed by the deputy county manager. I can see when there's a vacancy, there has to be an effort for a county government to look for a qualified, credential, code compliant chief assessor. It just wasn't done. Right now, we have a chief assessor who is the state certified general appraiser. I've been told that he's not an employee, he's a independent contractor, which more or less makes him at will, less than at will. And I don't know what the term of the contract is, but over the last 26 years, I worked under the commissioner's system. All three county executives, through their chief assessors, have assessed property differently. And it was because it was under the executive branch, which I had a problem with, I still have a problem with, but that is the will of county government, that it would be under the executive branch. But there has to be some oversight, I believe, by another branch of government, county council. And what I read about the problems with the bill, that it's taking control away from the county executive. The chief assessor works for the taxpayers. He or she doesn't work for just one person. One of the reasons we're in this situation where the school districts over the next 2-3 years, this deal with the common level ratio will wreak havoc with their budgets as well. And some of the school district directors blame Mr. Sylvester and I for bringing the lawsuit before the county. It was just a mistake, but this mistake has long-term effects on how much people pay in taxes and the budgets of the school districts. There was also something in Mr. Fitzgerald's veto about the West Penn multi-list. Council may not be aware, I was the part of the oversight of 2 court-ordered reassessments in 1998 and 2008. Mike Sully met with the directors of the West Penn multi-list to acquire the West Penn multi-list database. I know the brokers. I worked for most of the real estate brokers before I came from the private sector. The West Penn multi-list in both cases unanimously approved Allegheny County having access, Allegheny County assessors having access to the West Penn multi-list. This is how you validate and verify sales. This is where there's boots on the street, where the realtors are selling homes, and all of that information is available if the county had that information. Whether this bill goes through or not, I'm willing to help the county go before the multi-list to give the Office of Property Assessments the West Penn multi-list database. I honestly believe it's not rocket science. The first thing they'll want to know is who is the person that, was responsible for the West Penn multi-list database. That person must be a credentialed, code compliant, at a minimum, general appraiser. The county went there 2-3 years ago. County officials went to the multi-list a few years ago, but they didn't have someone who was qualified to acquire the database. And that is part of the rules and regulations of multi-list. So, I'm not here to criticize. I'm just saying we could do a better job. Our county assessors are hardworking people. They can do a better job verifying and validating sales that are submitted to the state tax equalization board. So I'm in favor. I know the vote was 9-6. I hope that one more council member can override county executive's veto. And the county executive is still responsible for that. And there will be transparency from this bill. So that's all I have to say. I support the bill.
We'll take questions.
Any questions from any council members?
Yeah, no, none for Mr. Stevens.
Mr. Sylvester, you want to come up and start?
Okay. Okay, this is happening.
I'm going to briefly reiterate what Mike Sully has said, that the credentials are written in ordinance. I'm also going to say that I know Lou Fabian. He is a very well qualified and excellent appraiser. He and I have talked shop in the past. And I don't say this as a criticism of Lou Fabian, but he does not possess the qualifications that are in the ordinance. He has never run an assessment office, and he's basically a solo practitioner, which means that unlike these larger appraisal firms, he doesn't supervise on a regular basis others do appraisal works. What I have personally observed, because Mr. Fabian has the time in for the 2022 common level ratio. Well, we have downloaded the data from the state tax equalization board, and we've looked at the coding, and what we're seeing is that the people who are doing the coding, in my opinion, can't possibly be reporting to Mr. Fabian. It would be fantastic if Mr. Fabian would have the authority to oversee the coding of data. And what appraisers do in every report.
All right, I'll wait. All right.
Every report that an appraiser makes, they attach the deed. The appraisers, one of the top items, first items that an appraiser looks at is the deed. And what we have in the latest 2022 common level ratio over the term of Lou Fabian are properties where if you look at the deed, you would see that a parent has transferred a deed to a child. They do it yourself. They put in the assessed value as the transfer price because it's an exempt transfer and it's exempt on the deed. And that gets coded as a valid sale. And I know that that can't possibly be Lou Fabian's work. And if it's not Lou Fabian's work, then it has to be the work of the coders that Mr. Pilarski and his crew have been supervising to do the inflation. I don't mean to get off topic. I think that if county council is able to overcome this veto, immediately county council can begin searching for a qualified chief assessment officer. And that's not to criticize Mr. Fabian. I would advocate that he stay in place and actually help you in finding someone who has the double credentials of both a chief general appraiser and also someone who's had experience. I know of the three people, or at least three of the people who were interviewed. There was only one person that I know of that was interviewed that had the credentials. Another person interviewed along with Mr. Fabian did not have the assessing credentials. That person is also an excellent appraiser. But unfortunately, chief assessment officer does not have the authority and doesn't have the credentials to oversee the coding process, which is essential. So if there are any questions, I'd be glad to field them.
Mr. Chairman, let it reflect that member of Filiagi has joined the meeting. Council members, Chairman Katina had to step out for a second. So if you guys just want to start down with your questions, Member DeMarco, Member Filiagi, Member Palmieri, and then Member Dewar, just please go ahead and start and move on.
My question's for Chairman Katina. He said during his statement that unless he heard some contradictory information, he intended to take and move forward with a motion to override the veto. But when I look at the invited guests, I don't see anybody invited from the administration. So who would be providing contradictory information? That's my question.
You can say I'm here, but it's a question.
Tim, I think we'll just have to wait till he comes back if you have other questions or if other members, and then we can come back to that. I'm sorry. County Manager Liptek is in the room.
Well, then when the chairman comes back, if the county manager would like to weigh in, I would welcome hearing from their perspective.
I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. I'm not sure what, so, I mean, it's clear, I'm not going to discuss veto negotiation. That's just not appropriate, and that's the body in a second. So I'm not sure what, I'm just here out of respect to Chairman asked me to be here, so that's why I'm here.
All right, Chairman Katina is back. So, Mr. DeMarco, if you maybe want to ask your question again of him.
Sure. You asked, you were trying
Sorry.
while he was out.
Sorry, I had to step out.
No, not a problem. You were out of the room, and Mr. Vahola was trying to get us to answer any questions that we had, while you were out of the room. And I said, my only question was, in your statement you read at the beginning of you said unless you had heard some contradictory information, you planned on offering a motion to override the veto. And I looked at the invited guests, and I didn't see anybody from the administration there as an invited guest. So I was questioning where you hoped that any contradictory information would come from if they hadn't been invited.
No, I invited actually the manager Liptak. She's here. So, I mean, if there's any information that she wants to provide, I discussed with her. I mean, she's welcome to say anything she wishes to say. I mean, it's entirely up to her. So, I mean, you can come up to the table if you have any, if you want to ask anything, manager. No, Yep. I mean, if there's specific questions for her, she's here to answer those specific questions, I think. So unless you have a specific question, I mean.
Well, you may ask, and the answer may be no, but is there any response that they would like to give to your statement?
To the statement that Mr. Katina gave at the beginning, I hardly disagree with it with respect to the chair. That I'm not gonna, I don't think it's appropriate for me to go and comment specifically out of respect for him in his position. We gave a veto letter, which I think is very clear, but I don't know that that's appropriate for me to go back and forth in that capacity. I will note, though, I'm a little upset by the calling out of a staff member of mine, specifically, incorrectly and not properly, and assertions regarding interview process that people were not involved, that I was. So I will like that to stand for the record that I disagree with those statements. What was the interview process?
That's all for me.
Okay. Any other questions? Hearing no other questions, does anyone else have any comments before we adjourn?
I would like to add one more thing.
Go ahead.
Help wanted sign down the road and how it should be done. I was manager of the Office of Property Assessment. This is around 2008-9. The chief assessor left. The county placed an ad with the International Association of Assessing Officers. It's an international assessing association in Kansas City. We also advertised in the AAP, the Assessors Association of Pennsylvania publication at the time. We also advertised with the Western Pennsylvania chapter of the Appraisal Institute. It's like 80 appraisers in Western Pennsylvania. And we had a lot of hits. That's all I can say. We went where the source was. One of the qualifications in the administrative code is the IAAO certification. There are some retired chief assessors around the country that could follow up on an ad. I don't know if that was done in the hiring of this chief assessor, and I believe John was talking about earlier. I believe it was the head of administrative services who conducted the interviews here, but they were mostly local people. So.
Okay.
Phases. There was a phase to bring someone in as an acting, which has been the case. And actually that person, I believe, has submitted documentations to Mr. Judge Hertzberger, which he confirmed he was qualified. I do thank you for recognizing Mr. Big, and does do a very good job and quite good at what he does. So that was one process. We also, as I reported to the chair, I think in earlier meetings, went out for full-blown search through a search agency. And that search unfortunately did not render a candidate that we felt was at the space at this time to take on the full position. And I did report that back to the chair out of courtesy because I know his interest. And all of those entities were pushed, that was all pushed out to everyone. So I don't want there to be any assertions that this entire process is not been taken seriously, because it has. And that's where I take a little bit of offense. There's accusations statements that are made, they're not, that aren't true. And it's pretty apparent that we in this county are not taking our job seriously. So I just wanted to, I thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to make that statement, because I have had conversations with you and in this meeting about that process. So,
Thank you.
thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome.
I just have a correction. Mr. Fabian was never presented in the court proceeding. Judge Hertzberg has not approved of Mr. Fabian. We all know Mr. Fabian has never had experience assessing, which is a 10-year requirement under the county ordinance. Mr. Chairman, you were stepped out of the room for the end of what I had to say, so for your benefit, I will repeat it. I think Mr. Fabian is a fantastic appraiser. He has never run assessment office or supervised assessors, therefore he's not qualified. I don't say that as criticism of him. I'm glad that at least someone with some qualifications is here in the county. But what I think is important is if this legislation is passed, I think that because Mr. Fabian does not have the qualifications, you might make a determination that that position is vacant. And since there's been no effort that has been publicized on recruiting someone who is qualified, that county council could take up the appointment of someone who has double qualifications of both experience in assessing and experience in appraising.
Okay. Manager Liptak?
Charge did request the credentials of Mr. Fabian presented to him for question and response, and it was stated fine and never been forward. Mr. Fabian is qualified, is active in capacity, and again, I don't want to get so back and forth. I'm not sure what's going on here, but the accusations that we're not taking our rules and jobs here seriously, it's offensive. And I just want to assure you, Mr. Chair, that we are taking it very seriously. That's why we immediately put Mr. Fabian in place. He is in place through May of 2024. He has a contract in an active capacity. He's been in place since 2022.
Okay. Anything else from anybody? Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have a question here, okay? And this has never been adequately answered. One of the reasons why I voted against this was because I didn't believe it was county council's role to do the hiring or firing of this employee. And when a number of our speakers today, Mr. Sully is one, talked about, and as well as yourself, I believe, talked about the need for county council to provide the oversight. But Mr. Sully had provided us an ordinance that had created a property assessment oversight board. Okay, and I've been unable to get answers from anyone in the county as to why we don't have that board. Now, I know Mr. Sully had said in an email that county council did away with it, but I've not been able to find anybody that can explain to me, when they did that, if they did it, how and why. Do you have any insight into that?
There's two people acknowledging that they can answer that question. So we'll start with Mr. Sully and then Manager Liptak.
Thank you. Yes, at one time there was, at the first quarterly reassessment that I was involved with, the Saber reassessment. New county government comes in the year 2000, and they take it very seriously. The council and Chief Executive Roddy decide to create an oversight board. Purpose of the oversight, it was a 3-member board. The county executive or his or her designee, the president of council, his or her designee, and then a real estate person, somebody like me, real estate broker. So you set up this 3-member panel. They had more responsibility than your bill. They certified the assessment book. That's what they did. They were to oversee any assessment practices, ordinances that were to follow. A year later, it became very apparent that it was a political board, and that it was almost at a point where the vote was 2-to-1 not to certify the assessment board, which to me is a county responsibility. So it became very political. So a year later, council abolished the oversight board. But initially, council believed, and Mr. Fitzgerald was a member of council at the time, that the county executive and the president of council should be involved in this process. So the oversight board is abolished and no one ever revisited that because there was no more reassessments after 02. So 2012, there's a court-ordered reassessment. So this is the first time council has revisited the possibility of council being involved in this process, but not regarding certification, which I agree with. It should be politicized, period.
Manager Liptak?
Thank you. The ordinance that created that was from this, it was signed and enacted in December of 2001. Not even a year since the inception of the new government.
Right.
It was abolished. Probably, I wasn't there. I mean, I was in county government. I wasn't working in this capacity, but I was in county government. And it clearly, it is not, it violates the home rule charter. We're gonna get beyond that. It does not exist. So whether someone who was on county council or a staff member thought it was okay at the time, that still doesn't serve what the law says. It's not in existence anymore. There was reasons, and I'm sure we can go through minutes as to why it was removed, but it's no longer there, and it hasn't been there, and it's now 2023. So I just wanted to state that. So whether someone thinks that should be the case or not, the law within our charter should be followed. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing this.
You're welcome. Any,
Yeah, Mr. Chair,
go ahead,
that helps,
Councilman.
that helps answer the question. I couldn't get an answer from it before. You know, it's like someone said, well, they did away with it. Well, help me understand how and why. And if they did away with it, could there have been legislation? You know, if there was legislation abolishing it, then could we look at that to see, you know, what the, were there any responsibilities transferred from that board that they did away with to something else? Meaning to council or any other entity. You know, how was it done away with? If
I just asked,
you would think you have-
I just asked Jared that maybe if he reviewed it, if you have anything to add, Jared?
The ordinance that did away with it, I want to say, is ordinance number 06 of 03.
Yes.
And there's sort of a cryptic note at the end of it that says the functions of the Property Assessment Oversight Board would be undertaken by the Chief Assessment Officer. And looking at the transcript of that meeting, there was conversation about revisiting that issue, and it never happened.
So,
Did you send that to us, please, Mr. Barker?
I'm sorry, say again?
Can you send that to
Did
them?
you
Yeah.
send that to us,
The ordinance or the minutes or both?
please? Both.
Okay.
Mike, Mr. Suley?
the home rule charter doesn't say who the chief assessor works for. It does not. I'm certain. An ordinance created the chief assessor, the job description, as I described earlier, and put it under the executive branch. Very, very well-respected county solicitor at the time. You know, I was against it. I sat down with Terry and Terry said, look, we had nowhere else to put it. We had to put it under the executive branch. Prior to home rule government, the assessment office was independent of county government. That's how all this evolved. But I was there, seeing all this. The assessment oversight board, in my opinion, became extremely political. And they dropped it, and they dropped the assessment committee after that as well. Wayne Fontana was the chair of the subcommittee on assessment practices. At one time, Allegheny County government wanted to have reassessments every year. During Mr. Roddy's term, they changed their minds and they said, we're going to do it every 3 years. Then Mr. Honorado comes in and says, we're going to have a base year. But no one ever went back to revisit the oversight committee until you introduce this bill, which I'm in favor of, only because, even if it ends up in court like everything else, this doesn't harm, I don't think that most people even know who hires the chief assessor or what his or her duties are. It's just, let's get this right and have some oversight.
Go ahead.
That's all.
May I just add that before home rule charter government, under the second-class county assessment law, which I know because I have 20 years worth of board of assessment, it's legal department, pre-home rule charter, it was an independent board established by state statute that ran the assessment. We did not have a chief assessment officer. We had a board of assessment that was independent of the county government, and they did the certification of the assessment, and they had all the qualifications to run an assessment office. What we have with the new charter, home rule charter, is a situation where that was not addressed. So the only way it can now be addressed is through legislation.
Yes.
Does anyone have anything else to add? Okay, since at this point in time, and again, I'm trying to look, I'm not, even though this happened in the past, obviously, I look more towards the future, that we know mistakes happened in the past, whether intentional, not intentional, what have you. Doesn't matter at this point in time. We have a problem that I think we need to ensure never happens again under anyone's watch, whether it's the new county executive in Murata or county executive Roddy or Rocky. I'm sorry, not Roddy. Roddy's had his chance, so Rocky, sorry about that. But moving, this is all about moving forwards and trying to ensure that basically we're on the right track moving forward. And I think we all agree that we can all agree that, I mean, we don't want this ever to happen again. It's just a matter of how do we get there. So like I said, I mean, this isn't pointing blame at anyone. It's just moving forwards, because I'm hoping county council will never have to revisit this again. I'm hoping a chief executive may never have to revisit this again. And we can make sure that there's no gaps in the process, and the process is as strong as it can be, and work for everybody and work for all of the taxpayers of Allegheny County. So at this point in time, I mean, I'm going to move forwards with the override vote on next Tuesday. And we can discuss it obviously more next Tuesday night, next Tuesday evening. But I think in the interest of the taxpayers of Allegheny County, this provides the oversight that's needed of the process that in the past, obviously, it's been broken. I mean, I think everyone admits it was broken. I mean, we did a number of things to basically try to make it better. I mean, Executive Fitzgerald signed off on the reappeals for both sets of them that we did, and I thank him for that. And like I said, moving forwards, I mean, I respect his opinion. We have a difference of opinion in this, and I think we both want what's best for the taxpayers of Allegheny County. But I think, like I said, I mean, I just believe that I respect his opinion, but I believe it needs to be done, and there needs to be additional oversight, like I said, so nothing like this never happens again. At this point in time, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion has been made, and I'll second it. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion, meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everyone.